I'm Jessica Lang, 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've worn a label I never asked for. The family disappointment. Not the rebel. Not the failure. Just the one who never quite lived up to the expectations everyone else seemed to slide into so easily. My younger sister Claire, on the other hand? She's the golden one. The one who always made everything look effortless. Glowing grades, perfect skin, charming smile, and a way of making people fall in love with her in 10 minutes or less. Where I was overlooked, she was celebrated. Where I was told to work harder, she was called gifted. We're only 2 years apart, but it always felt like we lived on opposite sides of the same mirror. Growing up in northern Connecticut, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. Dad was a corporate attorney. Mom ran a small but successful interior design firm. We had the house with the hydrangeas and the golden retriever. But behind closed doors, everything was about image. And image was Claire's specialty. Me? I liked books. I liked coding. I liked asking too many questions. And by the time I was 15, I had already figured out that attention in our family was earned through perfection, or performance. And I was too exhausted to fake either. I remember one Christmas, I gave my parents a photo album I had made by hand, scanning old family pictures, adding personal captions, printing and binding it myself. Claire gave them designer towels she had picked out with Mom during a shopping trip. Guess which one made it onto Facebook? But I never resented her for it. Not really. Because the truth is, I loved her. I defended her. I cheered for her. I just slowly learned to cheer more quietly. From the sidelines. Still, I tried. I went to college, got my degree in computer science, landed a job at a tech firm in Boston. I thought maybe if I built something of my own, if I achieved success outside of their view, I could earn a different kind of respect. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that sinks in and stays. But every time I came home, it was like none of it mattered. How's work, Claire? Oh, amazing, Mom. They're letting me design the whole campaign. Applause. How's work, Jess? Still at the same place. Polite nods. Quick subject change. So when Claire got engaged to her college sweetheart, a finance guy named Ryan with symmetrical teeth and symmetrical morals, the whole family lit up. Mom immediately went into Pinterest overdrive. Dad offered to pay for the wedding. And suddenly, every family dinner was about floral arrangements, dress fittings, and destination bachelorette plans. I smiled. I said congratulations. I bought her the champagne. I even helped her design the invites, because, of course, she wanted them to have a touch of personality. And then came the bridal shower. It was hosted at our family home, catered, color-coded, complete with a donut wall that spelled out Claired. Everyone was there. Relatives, coworkers, childhood friends who barely knew her anymore. And when it was time for the toast to the bride, Claire stood in the center of the living room like it was her coronation day. She held up her glass, smiling sweetly. I just want to say how grateful I am. For everyone who believed in me. For everyone who supported me. Especially my family. I know I haven't always been easy. She gave a fake little laugh, eyes darting to me for a beat. But hey, at least I'm not the family disappointment anymore. Laughter. Real, audible laughter. And then clapping. Even Mom clapped. That moment, that single sentence, and landed like a punch I didn't see coming. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just stood up. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, walked over to Claire, and dropped it in her lap. From one disappointment to another, I said, voice calm, heart pounding. Congratulations. And then I walked out. I didn't stay to watch her open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. And I knew what would happen the second she saw it. But I also knew this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's controlled. And timed. I didn't drive straight home after the bridal shower. My hands were shaking too much to hold the wheel. So I pulled into the first empty church parking lot I found and sat there for a long time. Engine off, head resting on the steering wheel, breath shallow. I kept hearing the laughter. That clap-track applause. My mother's smile. My sister's smug little joke that landed like a slap wrapped in a satin bow. But more than that, I kept thinking about the velvet box. It wasn't just some dramatic stunt. It had meaning. Real meaning. And that's probably what made it hit so hard. See, what Claire didn't know, what no one knew actually, was that the item inside the box wasn't new. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't shiny. It was a key. A simple, worn, silver key. It had once belonged to my grandmother, Dad's mother, who lived alone in a modest yellow house on the edge of Manchester. I used to visit her every summer until she passed when I was 18. She was the only person in the family who made me feel seen. Not tolerated, not managed, just seen. She taught me how to braid garlic, how to balance a checkbook, how to listen when someone's words didn't match their eyes. And before she died, she called me into her room, thin, tired, but still sharp as ever, and handed me a small box. "This is for you," she said. "The house is going to your father, but the key? That's different. What's inside is yours." I remember looking at the key like it was treasure. Because to me, it was. After her funeral, Dad sold the house in under 3 months. Said maintaining an old place like that didn't make financial sense. I wasn't even consulted. I was 18 and invisible, so I didn't argue. But what no one knew was that I'd spent the summer before her passing helping her clear out the attic. And during those quiet afternoons, she showed me something she never showed anyone else. An old wooden trunk. Inside were her journals, letters, a few antique brooches, receipts from the cafe she owned before she got married, and one brown envelope labeled, "For Jess, when they make you forget who you are." I never opened it. I just kept it. For 12 years, that envelope sat untouched in a safe deposit box under my name. I wasn't ready then. I didn't even know what kind of forgetting she meant. Until Claire stood in front of that room and cracked a joke that said everything they'd all been too polite to say out loud for years. "You are the disappointment. You've always been the disappointment." That's when I knew. The box needed to be opened. And not just by me. So before the bridal shower, I took the envelope from the safe deposit box. I put it, unopened, inside that velvet ring box Claire had once thrown at me in high school during a fight. And I added the key on top, tucked inside the satin interior. The same key my grandmother once placed in my hand like it was sacred. That's what Claire found when she opened it. Not revenge. History. A truth she never bothered to learn. A few hours later, after my hands finally stopped shaking, I drove home to my apartment in Boston. It was nearly midnight when I walked in. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since 6:45 p.m. Mom, Dad, Claire, even Ryan. I didn't answer any of them, but I read the texts. Claire, "What the hell is this?" Mom, "Jessica, you embarrassed your sister in front of everyone." Dad, "Call me. Now." Ryan, "That was messed up. Totally inappropriate. You ruined her moment." Only one text made me pause. Claire again, 20 minutes later. "Where did you get that letter?" She hadn't even said there was a letter, but that text confirmed it. She had opened the envelope, which meant the real bomb had already gone off, because I knew what was inside that letter. I hadn't read it, but I knew. My grandmother never used words lightly. Whatever was written in those pages was meant to rattle something awake. Maybe even burn a few illusions to the ground. And Claire? She'd built her whole identity on illusion. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand, staring at that last message. Then I wrote back. "Now you know who the real disappointment was." I didn't wait for a reply. Instead, I reached under my bed, pulled out an old storage box, and began sorting through the rest of my grandmother's belongings. Because something told me this was just the beginning. That secrets never stay buried forever. Not when someone finally dares to open the box. And I had a feeling Claire wasn't the only one who needed to be reminded of that. The next morning, I woke up to 14 missed calls. Claire had tried twice. My mother 5 times. My dad, who normally only called for major holidays or legal advice, had called 4 times. Even Ryan had tried once more, though I deleted that voicemail before I could hear his full tone of fake concern. I didn't feel regret. Just something heavier. Something older. The kind of weight that doesn't come from one night, but from decades of playing the role no one admits they cast you in. I made coffee, sat in silence, and finally opened my laptop. I had emails to answer, but I couldn't focus on code. Not today. My brain kept circling back to one question. What exactly did my grandmother write in that letter? Because when Claire asked, "Where did you get that letter?" I knew it had shaken her. The kind of shake Claire didn't admit easily. She had always been the type to laugh off confrontation, spin pain into passive aggression, and dismiss emotions as weakness. So for her to send that message, it meant she had read something that cracked her version of the story. Around noon, I got a text from an unknown number. "Jessica, it's Aunt Deborah. Your mother gave me your number. Claire is beside herself. What did you put in that box?" I didn't answer, but I did search through the storage box under my bed, pulling out everything that had once belonged to my grandmother. The old birth certificates, clipped newspaper articles, the deed to the house, even the faded menu from the cafe she ran in the 70s. And then I found it. Another letter. This one wasn't in an envelope. It was folded into quarters and tucked behind a photograph of her standing with a man I didn't recognize. On the back of the photo, in my grandmother's neat cursive, were the words, 1968, Arthur. The truth I never told Daniel. Daniel was my father. I hesitated, then opened the letter. "Jessica, if you're reading this, then you've reached a point in life where being invisible has become unbearable. I'm sorry it took you this long to get here. I wish I had been around to help you navigate this sooner. But if nothing else, let me give you this. There are truths your father never knew. Truths I never told because I thought protecting his pride mattered more than protecting your worth. Your father always wanted a son who would reflect his ambition. He got 2 daughters instead, one of them being me. And later, when he had children of his own, he projected all his insecurities onto you. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong. Too strong to play the game the way Claire did. He never knew how to handle girls who didn't smile when told to. That's not your fault. That's his fear. I saw so much of myself in you. The fire, the stubbornness, the ability to stand in the storm without bending. And I knew that one day, they would try to break you. With silence. With coldness. With comparison. That's how emotional control works. It doesn't shout. It whispers, "You're not enough." But you are. You always were. And if you ever doubt that again, remember this. Nothing powerful ever grows in comfort. Diamonds form under pressure. Rockets launch against gravity. You are not a disappointment. You are a reckoning. With love, Grandma May. I didn't realize I was crying until my coffee had gone cold in my hands. The words didn't just speak to the present. They explained the past. They gave shape to a wound I had carried without ever understanding how it had formed. And suddenly, I understood why Claire had screamed when she read her letter. Because inside her envelope was likely something just as personal. Just as pointed. I didn't know the exact content, not yet. But I knew my grandmother. She didn't write words without intention. She didn't leave weapons. She left mirrors. And maybe that's what scared Claire the most. Seeing a version of herself she had spent years avoiding. Around 4 p.m., Claire sent another message. Why would she write that to me? This time, I answered, maybe because she knew one day you'd need to hear it. A full hour passed before her reply came. I don't know what to do with it. I stared at the screen, then typed back, you don't have to do anything, just don't pretend it doesn't exist. Because for once in our lives, it wasn't about performance, or applause, or who's the golden one and who's the failure. It was about the truth. And once truth is opened, like a letter, like a box, it never really fits back into silence. 2 days after the bridal shower, I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. Not out of guilt, not even to make peace. I just needed answers. Mom opened the door like she was expecting someone else. When she saw it was me, her mouth tightened into that familiar, thin-lipped line, the one she always used when trying to stay polite in front of guests. "Jessica," she said, "we weren't expecting—" "I know." I cut her off gently. "I just want to talk. With both of you." Dad was in the kitchen, nursing a glass of bourbon like it was medicinal. He barely looked up when I entered, just gestured toward a chair and said, "Sit, if you're staying." Mom followed behind me, visibly tense, as though I might explode again. Like I had at the bridal shower. As if honesty were dynamite. For a few seconds, no one spoke. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the ice shifting in my father's glass. Then I said it. She screamed because I gave her something real. For once. Dad looked up slowly. "You humiliated your sister?" "No," I said, steady. "She humiliated herself. I just stopped playing along." He exhaled, loud. "You always were so dramatic." Mom flinched, just barely. And in that tiny gesture, I saw everything she never said out loud. The years of standing just off stage, silently supporting, never interfering, never protecting. "Do you even know what was in the envelope?" I asked him. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. They never asked what I carried, only how they looked. "I've spent years thinking there was something wrong with me," I continued. "That maybe I was too much, or not enough. That if I had just tried harder, been sweeter, smiled more, I would have been allowed to matter. Like Claire." "You do matter," Mom said too quickly. "We've always loved you." "You loved the version of me that didn't make things uncomfortable?" I said. "That stayed quiet at family dinners. That clapped for Claire and said thank you when you gave me birthday cards with $20 bills instead of conversations." Dad sat up straighter. "We supported you just the same." "No, you tolerated me," I corrected. "Claire got pride. I got politeness." The words sat between us like smoke, curling through the room. Then Mom spoke again, softer this time. "I read the letter, the one from your grandmother. Claire showed me." I turned to her. "And?" Her voice wavered. I think your grandmother saw what we didn't want to admit. That you didn't need applause. You needed to be seen, and we kept asking you to shrink." There it was. The sentence I'd waited decades for. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. Dad stood up and walked to the sink, refilling his glass. "Your grandmother always had a flair for the dramatic. That house was filled with old bitterness." "No," I said, rising to meet his tone. "It was filled with truth, the kind this family avoids like a plague." He turned, eyes hard. "So what now, Jess? You want us to grovel? Rewrite history? Throw Claire under the bus for your validation?" "No," I said calmly. "I want you to stop pretending everything's fine when it's not. I want you to understand that damage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence after you call someone a disappointment and expect them to smile anyway." For a moment, none of us moved. Then, from the hallway, came a voice I hadn't heard in 2 days. I asked her to give me the box. It was Claire. She stepped into the room wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. The first time I'd seen her not perfectly polished in, well, years. "I told her to do something bold," she continued. "I didn't know what she'd bring, but I asked for it. I said, 'If you want to be seen, then make them see you.'" Dad looked at her like she had lost her mind. "You planned this?" "No," Claire said, but I provoked it. Because I knew she was about to disappear again, and I couldn't let her, not this time. My breath caught in my chest. Claire looked at me, and for once, the sarcasm was gone. The letter, it talked about how we both played our parts, how I played the perfect one to keep the peace, and how you were the mirror we kept trying to break. I nodded slowly. "Turns out," she said, "mirrors don't break that easy." We stood in that kitchen, the four of us, not yelling, not hugging, not healed, but cracked open, honest. And it was more than I had ever expected. Because sometimes change doesn't come in fireworks or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it comes in the moment a golden child admits the gold was only paint. 3 days after that kitchen confrontation, I got an invitation. Not a metaphorical one, a real one. Cream-colored cardstock, gold trim, sent by Claire. It was a new invite to her bridal shower do-over, as the note explained. This time, she wrote, no performance. Just the people who need to be in the room. I'd like you to be there. And I'd like you to speak, if you want to. I read the note 3 times before setting it down on my desk. It was surreal. Claire asking me to speak at her shower? The same Claire who used to roll her eyes when I corrected her grammar or asked too many nerdy questions at dinner? The same Claire who used to tell her friends I was just introverted when I disappeared into books at family parties? That Claire was shifting, but healing isn't linear. It doesn't arrive with one box and one confrontation. It unfolds in pieces, like slow-blooming truths. So I didn't say yes right away. Instead, I sat on my balcony, watching the Boston skyline flicker in the early evening. And I thought about what I would even say, if I did go. Not revenge, not payback, but truth, the kind that's been earned. The next day, I called my grandmother's old neighbor, Mrs. O'Malley. She was nearly 90 now, but she still lived across the street from where Grandma May used to keep her yellow house, the one Dad sold like it was dead weight. Mrs. O'Malley answered on the 3rd ring. Jessica Lang, she said, her voice clear. You sound just like your grandmother. That nearly made me cry. She remembered the house, of course, and she remembered the summer I helped clean out the attic. You were the quiet one, she said, but not shy. There's a difference. I told her about the letter, the box, the fallout. She listened the way only the elderly can, with stillness, without trying to fix it. When I was done, she said, that house may be gone, but the stories inside it aren't. Sounds like your grandmother trusted you to carry them forward. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a disappointment. I felt like a torchbearer. A few days later, I showed up to Claire's new bridal shower. It wasn't held at our parents' house. It was hosted in a cozy cafe near the edge of the city, where the lighting was warm and the chairs mismatched in a way that felt real. There were maybe a dozen guests this time. No extended cousins, no coworkers who only came for the wine, no Instagram backdrops. Just people who mattered. Claire wore a soft blue dress, minimal makeup. No crown of flowers or perfectly rehearsed smile. She looked like a version of herself I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. She greeted me at the door with a long, quiet hug. I wasn't sure you'd come, she whispered. I wasn't either, I replied, but I'm glad I did. Halfway through the afternoon, after the cake was cut and people were sipping mimosas, Claire stood up. I know we did this already, she said, voice steady. And I know some of you heard things at the first shower that were unexpected. A few nervous chuckles followed. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge something. Or rather, someone. She looked straight at me. My sister Jessica, she said, has been many things in this family. Helper, fixer, protector, and yes, truth-teller. And for years I let her carry all the hard things while I performed the easy ones. But not anymore. She paused. Jess, would you mind saying a few words? The room turned toward me, and for a moment I felt that old weight rise again. The voice in my head whispering, don't stand out, don't make it weird, don't speak too loud. But I stood anyway. I walked to the center of the room and cleared my throat. Thank you, I began, for giving me a space I never expected to have. Not because I need a microphone or a spotlight, but because for a long time I believed I didn't belong in rooms like this. Family rooms, celebration rooms. The truth is, I wasn't the disappointment. I was just different. And different isn't a flaw. I looked at Claire, who was watching me without blinking. We all play roles, I said. Some we choose, some we inherit. But eventually, we get to decide whether we keep playing them. And I've decided to put mine down. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just spoke. Clearly, calmly, like someone who had finally stopped asking for permission to be seen. After the speech, something shifted in the air. Not dramatically. Not with applause or gasps or a teary standing ovation. It was quieter than that. A stillness. The kind that follows when something heavy finally lands and everyone realizes they've been holding their breath. Claire stood first. She didn't say anything. She just walked over and hugged me. Longer this time, with no whispers, no rehearsed sentiment. Just arms wrapped around arms. Real. Then one of her friends started clapping. Then another. And before I knew it, a slow, honest round of applause filled the room. Not for performance, but for release. For growth. For the courage it takes to say, I'm not who you thought I was. And that's okay. That night, after the guests had gone and the cafe lights were dimmed, Claire and I stayed behind to help the staff clean up. She insisted on wiping tables while I stacked used plates. It felt surreal. Us doing something together. Something normal without the roles we'd both learned to play. She handed me a damp cloth. Do you want to know what was in my envelope? I paused. Only if you want to tell me. She leaned against the counter. It was a copy of an old letter Grandma wrote my dad. One she never sent. My brows lifted. To Dad? She nodded. She wrote it the day I was born. Apparently, she overheard him say he was relieved the second child was normal this time. That I wouldn't be difficult like you. My stomach tightened. I didn't know he said that. Neither did I, but Grandma did, and she called him a coward. Said any man who confuses silence for goodness is raising sheep, not children. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Sounds like her. Claire shrugged. She also wrote something else. That one day, the difficult one would be the only person in the family brave enough to face truth out loud. And that I'd either grow to resent it or respect it. And which did you choose? I asked. She met my eyes. I'm still choosing. It was the most honest answer I'd ever heard her give. As we walked out of the cafe, she handed me a small envelope. This was also in the box, she said. I think she meant it for both of us. I waited until I got home to open it. Inside was a single photograph. Old, faded, edges curled. It was of Grandma May holding two babies, one in each arm. Claire and me. She was laughing, her head thrown back, hair a mess, eyes squinting in the sunlight. On the back, she had written in blue pen, "Let the world call you difficult. It means you didn't bend. Stay upright." I placed the photo in my bookshelf, tucked behind a frame of my college graduation, the one no one in my family attended. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. Because healing doesn't mean rewriting history. It means reframing it. And I had finally done that. Claire's wedding was held 4 weeks later. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences at the rehearsal dinner. Tension between our dad and me that never quite resolved. Mom stayed mostly neutral, walking a careful line between peacemaker and passenger. But Claire? She was different. Her vows were raw. Her gratitude was real. And during the reception, during the speeches, she raised a glass and said, "To my sister," who showed me that some legacies are worth breaking. I didn't cry then. I just nodded. Because that moment wasn't about being forgiven or celebrated. It was about being understood. And for someone who'd spent her entire life explaining herself to people who had already made up their minds, that was everything. Weeks later, back in Boston, I was asked to speak on a podcast about women in tech. The host asked me about failure, imposter syndrome, and where I found my confidence. I told the truth. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt, I said. It's the refusal to let other people's versions of you win. She asked where I'd learned that. And I smiled, thinking of a velvet box, a key, and a letter written by a woman who saw me before anyone else dared to. From the disappointment, I said. The one who didn't stay quiet. So if you're still watching, still wondering what was in that box, maybe this is your sign. To stop shrinking. To stop apologizing for being the one who didn't fit their mold. Because sometimes the biggest gift you'll ever give is the truth. Wrapped in velvet, delivered with grace, and left behind with your head held high.